Hello and welcome to OverShadow ShadowCast with your host Thomas Anderson. No tech wizard again this week. We're doing a wee bit of restructuring about when we do these, and that means that we haven't quite organised entirely how it works at the moment, so our schedules aren't quite fitting together at the moment, so Abigail is unable to attend. We should be fixed by next week though. We should know what we're doing by then. First things first, what have I been playing? Well, I have been playing more Empire Total War. As I said last time, I've been relearning some of the things I'd forgotten before, and I've really come on recently and remembered a lot of things, and I'm doing much better. It's the worst campaign I've ever had, but it's because of the slow start. Now that I've begun to remember what I need to do, it's going much faster, and that's because of that I'm progressing really nicely, and I feel like I know what I'm doing. Naval wise, I'm still not doing very well. I've only got one fleet, and it's currently penned in a harbour, and I can't do anything with it. But I suppose the biggest fleet, which is a threat to me, is the fleet penning me in. So as long as as long as I'm stuck, it's stuck. So that's not too bad. In everything else, I'm doing much better. And when it comes to the naval stuff, I would be doing much better. It takes longer to catch up because of the amount of research you have to do, and the build times for the ships is ridiculous. You know, in the time it takes you to build a couple of ships, you've built half an army. So mistakes at the beginning are harder to fix from that. But I'm getting there. I've also been playing an awful lot of Subnautica recently, and that I'm playing it with somebody else, and that makes it much better because I think that game, while interesting, would drain me a bit. It would just the story sort of opens up and it's getting there, but it's not there yet. And so there's a few things I'm really interested in, but it doesn't feel like it's really opened up yet. I feel a wee bit like it's a little bit of exposition and then random exploring. I'm still not into the actual main story part. But I am finding that game really interesting. I think the exploration's hard at this point because of the lack of equipment. You've got to find all the pieces, as it were, before you can build anything. But I am thoroughly enjoying that. Like, what we're able to build at the minute is pretty cool, and I have seen one of the big bad scary beasties in the game, very scary, and managed to survive. So I'm taking that as a big win. Out with that, I'm just wishing that I could build a bit more to have a bit more fun, because I can really see where the game wants you to go, but it's just not really letting me go there yet. But hopefully we'll get there, and I'll be able to. The before you upgrade your equipment, but you've got some vehicles. You've got a depth limit for one of the vehicles. The sea moth of 200 meters, even though you can swim much further down than that until you upgrade it. So that means that you're really limited in how far you can go to begin with. I think you start off with a tank of 50 seconds, and you upgrade it, and then you use the sea moth. That takes you down to however far it can go, and then you swim from there, and then you build bases, and you use the other, like the submarine that's there, to go even further. Eventually you go really deep, but we're not there yet. And I also find in video games, exploration just for the sake of exploration is just, if it's aimless, I feel like I don't know why I'm doing it, and therefore I don't enjoy it as much. But if there's a purpose, it's a bit easier for me to get into. So I'm hoping that it's a bit more pointed. It's not just massive open areas, do whatever you want, and in one tiny wee corner is something that could be relevant. I hope it's a little bit smaller almost than that, otherwise you're just going to get lost, because the seabed is enormous enough as it is. You don't need a cavern network 8 times the size of that. But we'll see, because if it's fun to swim about in those vehicles, then it doesn't matter if it's a lot of game. It's just, I just hope I don't feel like I've got a clue what it is I'm trying to do too much, because then I'll not want to play it. But so far that hasn't happened, so I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I haven't been playing anything else, so we'll just move on to the stories we're going to talk about. So, first one is a quick update on the Fallout 76 inventory hack, which Bethesda claims to have fixed now. There's a couple of examples of what happened. So one, these are all from videos posted online. One shows a group of people hacking an old man, or the character in the game of an old man in real life, and they took 2 legendary items from him. I think they were both weapons. They killed him over 40 times over the course of 2 in-game days, which is about 20 minutes in real life. Performed 2 armour breaks, which is a hack that shatters the armour so it's useless, and performed 5 base wipes. They basically just wiped out his base. And that one was particularly galling because they actually laughed about how it took him a week to build his base and then they destroyed it. So I mean, that was just like evil. Like, they were enjoying doing that to him. The other example is unfortunately from a little kid. They took his inventory from him, then they convinced him to trade his only remaining legendary item for all his other stuff that they'd taken, and the reason that he went along with it was because I think he had an item that he wanted to show his dad, because he kept talking about his dad after they stole from him. And then they just stole that last legendary item anyway. And he's, for about 10, 20, 30 minutes, he's just greeting his wee eyes out. And you might think he was faking, but you can't fake cry for that long. And like, he was genuinely crushed at what had happened, and like, I can totally get the idea of, like, he's really proud of something that he's done, he wants to show his dad it, and then they nick it from him and he just collapses. I can see that, I can understand that happening. And they just found it funny. So they like stole some of his other things and then like put stuff on his character and then made fun of him and then took it back. And like, he just got so upset. He stopped playing. I don't think I don't know if either of these players have gone back, but I can totally understand why if they haven't, why they haven't. This group of individuals that performed this feat of majestic heroism are believed to have robbed over 500 other players just for the purpose of griefing them, because you can't possibly need all those items. Because the people playing this game are people who are really playing this game. Apart from the hackers, obviously. So they're basically just, they're just bullying people online, which I think in a lot of countries is actually a crime. So technically, you could look into the theft of items that they may have paid for in the atomic shop, because that actually is money. That's a macro transaction, so that's straight up money. So you could look into that as being some sort of fraud, I think was the word being bandied around. I mean, there are other stories that were not necessarily part of that video. One included a tale of a hacker stealing a player's inventory, and then I believe they sold it back to the player at inflated prices by putting it all inside of a vending machine and forcing the player to buy everything back before anybody else came along and bought it. It'll be interesting to see what Bethesda do here. They've got options like fix their game, but they may go down the litigious route, or they may just sweep it under the carpet and pretend it never happened. That one might be a bit harder because they've actually struggled in previous instances to return a lot of the stolen items to players who've reported things like this happening. So it may not be possible for them to sweep it under the carpet in that way. But I don't think they're necessarily going to fix it either, because the last time they tried that, everything fell apart. So they're more likely to go down the legal route, which doesn't actually necessarily help the players, because if they claim that they've already fixed the hack, and the legal route's not going to get those players back their items in game, so that's maybe to stop other people from doing it in the future. But I think for me the biggest problem here is the fact that the players have bullied the other ones, not necessarily that they've broken the in-game rules of Fallout 76, but they've actually cyber-bullied these guys. And while I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of coming down too heavily on stuff done online, I just think a lot of the laws can be worded a bit loosely. This is straight up. You know, they spent concerted time making these players' in-game lives a misery. Like, they trashed the work of thousands of hours. That's no different to me than walking into CDT and smashing up somebody's project. That's a lot of hours of work and they've just taken it to pieces for no reason. I actually found the one with the little kid quite difficult to listen to. That part of the video I was watching on it, that was quite difficult. I'm not going to show it. That was quite difficult because you can tell that that kid's really upset. And when he starts talking about his dad, you're sitting thinking, oh, come on, guys. Just give him it back. It's a kid, give him it back. And they don't. I mean, these guys are probably 16, 17, 18. You know, they're kids. Like, I know legally they're not, but they're just, like, psychologically, these are children who think it's funny to pick on people who can't defend themselves. Which in and of itself is actually quite pathetic. But I suppose the relevant thing is here is what are Bethesda going to do, and we don't know yet. All we've heard from them is that they think they've fixed the problem, so got to keep our eyes open for that one. But hopefully this will not be happening to any more people, although a lot of people have already pulled out of playing the game, or playing the game in adventure mode, because they just don't trust it to not have their stuff stolen until lots of people have played lots of hours and reported that there's no problems. So this might have a knock-on effect. I think their best bet for Bethesda here would be trying to fix the game, but also trying to get those people their stuff back, because then other people won't worry as much. A legal resolve doesn't actually help those people feel better. Move on to the next story. So there's only two things we want to talk about, and the second one is loot boxes. Just the war on loot boxes. So it had some good victories last year, but also some interesting changes and interesting reveals, almost like plot twists, when the UK decided it was starting to look into banning them, and several reports were saying that they should ban them, and that was quite interesting, considering that so far the only two countries that have actually done it, I believe, are Belgium and Holland. So that was quite a jump. The UK is a big market. If America ever did it, it would basically stop the practice overnight. But the UK would be a very, very, very considerable step. So I'm saying there that it would stop the practice overnight. But why? Well, this is why. If we look at the companies that really use loot boxes, a third of EA's annual sales come from loot box mechanics, 18% for Activision Blizzard and 11% for Take-Two Interactive. Now, Take-Two Interactive, 11%, they can move away from that. But a third for EA and 18% for Activision Blizzard, that's a bit more difficult to move away from, especially when you take into account the fact that EA puts this stuff into all their games, especially the big ones, we know that, like FIFA. But Activision Blizzard rely very heavily on Call of Duty and this. They don't have much else, basically. Call of Duty and loot box mechanics. Remove those, either one of them, and they don't have the breadth required to actually reorganise and restructure their company to be able to deal with the sudden loss of 18% of their income, their revenue. EA would struggle with a third, but the fact they've got more developers making more games, they've got more of a chance there to restructure in the short time, even though it's nearly double the amount. Activision just don't, frankly. They don't make the number of games required. And they did actually just fire 800 people, so their company it doesn't have flexibility when it's... They've constructed themselves entirely for this business model, and that means they won't have flexibility. Take-Two have a bit more because it's just roughly 1 in 10, and loot boxes are not the same as selling like packets of in-game currency. So technically speaking, that wouldn't be considered a loot box. and so they could get away with selling that. And that combined with the games they make, they might have to increase the number of games they make a year because they don't make enough, but they've got the potential to do that. Well, not game a year, but games in, say, a 5 to 10 year period. But they've got the flexibility to do that. Activision don't. And EA already do it. So these companies would take a hard hit, but I actually think Activision's in the worst place because it doesn't have the flexibility to pivot away from the model it's currently using. The other two sort of do. EA would really, really struggle, and you could easily see it not managing to do it. And Take-Two Interactive should be able to do it. Because of the quality of game, single-player game they actually are able to produce. They could pivot away from that, make single-player DLC, make currency packs like they already do, that sort of thing. They'd take a bit of a hit, but they could pivot away from it a lot more easily than the others could. These sort of facts, these figures are why I think that these companies are in trouble to a degree, differing degrees obviously, if loot boxes get banned. And it does also demonstrate the difficulty, the real problem here. I mean, Activision, EA, these companies are billions. They make billions. And that's in profit. And it's a third from loot box mechanics. 18% for Activision Blizzard from loot box mechanics. From loot box mechanics. That's huge amounts of money. So these companies would take a huge hit, but it's one of the problems that they've got is it's become more obvious the more they do it. And the more money taken in, the more people they're selling these loot box mechanics to, the more people have problems, and then the more likely everybody else is to notice and do something about it. And so they've kind of done themselves in there. But it's why that we are trying to do something about it, as societies are coming together to try and do something about this, because it is posing a real problem, especially for kids. And it's why they want to stop it, but it's why when it is eventually banned, these guys will take a hit. So I think that 2020 will be a really big year when it comes to loot boxes and the laws around them, because they're too important financially for these companies, but also the effect on our people, especially our young people, is too important for the rest of us to ignore. And also they damage the games, because the games have just not been as good from these companies since they started to rely so heavily on loot box mechanics. There's potential for growth in games development there that they're just not actually taking on board, because they see the potential for growth in pure revenue based on this nonsense. So hopefully it stops, but I do believe it will, and I think that next year will be really important, and I just wanted to go through those figures so that you could see why once changes are made, this will be a heavy hit for them. Belgium and the Netherlands, no offence meant, but they're not the largest markets. There are slightly larger markets, so that's already been a hit, costing them millions. And over the course of years, it will obviously get towards billions. But a country like the UK or the US or Canada or Japan or something like that is a much, much bigger target. Japan maybe less so. I'm not entirely sure if loot boxes would be considered illegal there. And they've already got that example of their ways around loot boxes and stuff like that. Gambling as well. But the UK and the US, I think if you got the UK and the US and maybe Canada, with some of the European countries having already made some subtle changes to their laws, France, Germany, I think you'd crush that, because it just wouldn't be worth it for them to put that time into a loot box mechanic. They'd try and pivot towards something else to make money. Anyway, that's all for today. We'll see you next week. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, you can leave a comment underneath. You can click the like button. You can hit the subscribe button. You can click the notification bell so you'll be told whenever we upload. You can contact us at overshadow.shadowcast@gmail.com. Description's in the link below. There is a Facebook page, but as I said before, that's for when we actually put up gameplay videos, and that should be happening soon in the next couple of months. That's our plans, and we hope we see you next week. Bye bye.